Imagine it's the mid-1800s. Another humid morning dawns in Oak Alley Plantation, Louisiana. Antoine, a Creole man in his mid-30s, sets to a very specific task, assigned to him by his owner. Antoine is enslaved, but has made a name for himself as an expert gardener. He knows the trees and other plants of the estate like the back of his hand, and his expertise in tending them far outstrips that of his owner, or in fact anyone else in the region. His task is to use his skills in grafting to create a cultivar of pecan that creates large, regular, and easily crackable nuts. Like most enslaved people, little was recorded about Antoine in his life, yet the fruits of his labor echo through the annals of history and form an integral part of the story of how the nuts of this seemingly untamable tree ended up as a worldwide favorite. You're listening to Plant Connection. Life today can feel overwhelming, like we've drifted away from its natural rhythm. This podcast is your space to slow down, breathe, and rediscover the peace and clarity that come from reconnecting with the natural world. I'm your host, Lisa Cutshaw. Let's reconnect, one plant at a time. The pecan tree is an icon of the American South. Pecan pie, praline, pecan brittle, they're enjoyed across the nation. Yet it is one of the most recently domesticated major food plants. Before Antoine's efforts, pecans were wild and unpredictable. Let's begin by learning a bit about wild pecans and about their long relationship with people. The tree is native to North America. In fact, it's one of our only major tree nuts that are native to the country. Pecans, known scientifically as Caria illinoensis, are a type of hickory found in the central southeastern North America, mostly growing along rivers, in particular the Mississippi and its tributaries. Further south than the Mississippi, their range consists of just a few isolated areas where the conditions are just right. The southernmost frontier of their native range is Oaxaca, Mexico. Their close relatives include shagbark hickory, black walnut, and butternut. All these trees are known for their delicious nuts and strong, durable woods that are often used to make attractive furniture. Pecan trees can live for over a century and grow up to 100 feet tall or more. Their liking of moist, rich soils makes them a common companion of trees such as green ash, sycamore, pin oak, sweet gum, and cottonwood, all of them easily found in floodplains across the southern U.S. And as you might suspect, pecan trees are a valuable part of their natural ecosystems. They provide habitat and sustenance for a range of wildlife, and their deep roots help stabilize soil and prevent erosion, especially important for the riverside environments where they're most typically found. Birds, squirrels, and other animals take shelter among their branches. They're also the host trees for the caterpillars of several moth species, including the beautiful regal moth, whose equally spectacular caterpillar, known as the hickory-horned devil, can grow to the size of a hot dog. Pecan flowers are not very showy, which figures, as they're not designed to attract insects. Pecans are wind-pollinated. They produce long catkins, which are covered in male flowers. When these split open, they release millions of pollen grains. Though the probability of any one grain settling on a female flower on another tree is very low, the sheer number of grains involved means that at least a few will reach success. The female flowers are small and yellow-green, found on spikes at the tips of shoots. If pollinated, these will become the pecans that we know and love. Like many people, pecans are one of my favorite nuts, partly for their deliciousness, but also for the memories they hold. It was a normal thing in our family to go to the farmer's market once a month or so and get the fruits and vegetables we didn't grow in our garden. Pecans were one of those, and I remember bringing home a big bag one year, it was huge, and asking my aunt what she thought we should make. My sister and I spent hours shelling nuts. Oh yes, this was no wimpy little bag of pecan pieces. We worked for our treats that year. Thank you very much. We made several things with them, but the one that sticks in my memory was a recipe we found on the back of a cake mix box. And it was so good, we've made it just about every year since. And the best part was the hours spent sitting at the kitchen table with my sister, shelling nuts and talking. I think I'll ask her if she'd like to make some pecan bars again, though I'm pretty sure she'll tell me to buy the nuts already shelled this time. But you know, it's not just us humans that have a taste for these nuts. The pecans mature between October and December. Many are consumed by large birds, such as wild turkeys, blue jays, and woodpeckers, rodents such as squirrels, and other mammals like opossums and raccoons. It might seem strange at first for pecans to produce these nuts just to feed the local wildlife. Unlike fruits, the seeds do not pass through the animal's digestive tracts. Rather, they are destroyed when consumed. But we must remember that some animals, in particular squirrels and birds like jays and woodpeckers, store nuts to have a ready supply in the winter, and they don't remember exactly where they store all of them. Forgotten nuts, carried far from their parent tree by these helpful critters, may become a new tree next year. And pecans also have another trick up their sleeves to prevent all their nuts getting eaten. Like other nut trees, pecans go through massed fruiting, a boom and bust cycle, which means a huge crop one year may be followed by 1 or more years of meager pickings. It's a way of overwhelming the capacity of all those nut-eating animals to eat them all, so that at least some nuts will survive to become trees. And somehow, we're still not sure exactly how. All the trees in a region produce their bumper crops in the same year. It's an ongoing ecological mystery that shows we still have a lot to figure out about the world around us. And as esteemed botanist and author Robin Wall Kimmerer writes in her excellent book, Braiding Sweetgrass, it is a useful reminder for us about the importance of unity to survival and flourishing. And various members of the hickory family are often an important component of reforestation and land rehabilitation efforts. They're genetically diverse, readily hybridize, and can adapt to different climates and soil types. They're also often a favorite for alley cropping, a practice that involves growing crops between rows of trees or shrubs. This is a more biodiversity-friendly agricultural practice, using trees like pecan to reduce soil erosion, enhance soil productivity, reduce use of chemicals, and provide habitat for local wildlife. Though the 19th century saw the beginnings of pecan cultivation, this tree has been valued by people for far, far longer. The name pecan comes to us from the Algonquin, who used the word pecan or pecani or pigan to describe any nut that required a stone to crack, namely pecans, walnuts, and hickory nuts. The French took this word to refer to pecans alone, and from there it entered other languages. For many Native Americans, pecans were a staple, especially important to tide them over the lean winter months. Indigenous people did not cultivate the trees, but rather camped near pecan groves around harvest season and traded gathered nuts through complex continent-wide trade routes. Excavations in Texas and Louisiana indicate that this practice began at least as early as 6750 BC. I'm going to let that sink in. Pecans had medicinal applications too. The Comanche pulverized pecan leaves to treat ringworm. The Lumbee used bark tea for stomach trouble, and the Kiowa reportedly used a decoction of the bark for tuberculosis. The leaves and bark are both high in tannins, which have antioxidant properties, and also lend themselves to providing a natural dye for textiles. Robin Wall Kimmerer also writes about the enduring connection between native peoples and pecans. She recounts a story from her grandfather who, in 1895, was a young boy. He and his brother find a pecan grove along the banks of the Canadian River, a lifesaver after an unsuccessful fishing endeavor. The ground beneath their feet is strewn with pecans, but they have nothing to carry them with. So in a moment of ingenuity, they strip off their pants, tie the leg holes shut, and fill them with nuts. Once home, their family boiled them up into a porridge. The fat that rose to the surface skimmed off as a high-calorie nut butter for the winter. When European explorers first began exploring the New World, pecan trees immediately caught their eye. Spanish accounts from the 1500s record seeing great groves of pecan trees. They also note native populations coordinating pecan harvests with regional gatherings and trade. 200 years later, French explorers also found pecans to be very agreeable. French Jesuit missionary Pierre-François Xavier de Charlevoix said the pecans had a flavor so fine that the French make pralines of them as good as those made of almonds. But he also noted the variability of the trees, saying, "The shell of some of them is very thin, while others have it harder and thicker, but the fruit is so much the less on that account." This unpredictability would come to be a major stumbling block for would-be cultivators. Another Frenchman, explorer and botanist André Michaud, observed Native Americans managing wild pecans in Illinois in 1819 and was perhaps the first to voice the possibility of commercializing the nut. He also suggested the idea of grafting the tree rather than growing from seed. His idea was to graft it onto a black walnut tree, which wasn't successful, but it planted the idea. The Founding Fathers also took an active interest. Jefferson received a box of pecan nuts and seedlings from a New Orleans resident and wrote about them in his Notes on Virginia in 1782. Classifying them in the walnut family, he introduced them to George Washington, and both went on to grow pecans on their personal properties. Later, when living in Paris, Jefferson even wrote home to request 200 or 300 pecan nuts from the Western country, to arrive as fresh as possible. When the Civil War came around, Union soldiers took pecans back from the front to share with their families, thus propagating the tree across the nation. It was a few decades before the Civil War that Antoine was experimenting with his pecan grafts, but he was not the first to do so. A renowned South Carolina farmer named Abner Landrum had a shot at commercial pecan cultivation in the 1820s through grafting pecans to young hickory trees, but his efforts were largely in vain. 20 years later, a Louisianan named Dr. A.E. Cullum realized there was an exceptionally productive pecan tree on the Anita plantation, which regularly produced large nuts with thin shells. He experimented with grafting twigs from this tree onto other pecan trees. By now you might be thinking, what was the big deal about commercializing pecans? Why didn't they just plant some nuts from high-quality trees and go from there? The reason is that the offspring of a single wild pecan tree is always highly variable, with differences in nut size and quality, shell toughness, yields, and many other factors. This is because pecans do not self-pollinate, so seeds have a mixture of genes from two different trees, which makes for unpredictable traits once they reach adulthood. It's the same reason you wouldn't plant a rose seed, for instance, and expect to get the same rose flowers as the parent. And given that these trees take a long time to mature and show whether they're commercially viable or not, this factor has frustrated generations of would-be pecan farmers. This is why pecan farmers were experimenting with grafting rather than planting from seed. I'll take a moment to explain how grafting works. It's a technique that's been commonly used by farmers and gardeners across the world for centuries, yet the biology behind it remains extraordinary. Grafting happens when a piece of one tree is attached to another. Over time, the tissues will join up, and both the original tree and the grafted part will continue growing, even in many cases if the trees involved are of different species. There are crazy examples of this concept being taken to extremes. The tree of 40 fruit, for example, is a tree created by Syracuse University professor Sam Van Aken that, as the name suggests, contains grafts of 40 different types of stone fruit: almonds, apricots, cherries, nectarines, peaches, and plums. The grafted part is genetically identical to the tree it was originally taken from, so if a twig from a highly productive pecan tree is grafted onto another tree, that twig will grow into branches and eventually become highly productive itself. Grafting can happen naturally, too, when trees happen to meet in the wild. It's an amazing demonstration of the extremely flexible nature of plant growth and reproduction. So, given that propagating pecans through seeds produces very unpredictable offspring, Dr. A.E. Cullum thought that grafting could be a better option. But he was frustrated in his efforts. A more expert hand was needed. So, following rumors of an expert gardener on the other side of the Mississippi River, he took cuttings of the tree to Oak Alley Plantation, owned by J.T. Roman. Roman was the owner of Antoine, the expert gardener in question, and tasked him with producing a successful graft. Antoine, it turned out, was the man for the job. He began with 16 successful grafts around 1846, eventually expanding to 126 grafted trees within the property. He was never truly credited with his breakthrough. Not even his full name is known. He was the child of a mother born to slavery and a father captured and enslaved from the African Congo, and was born around 1810. In 1848, J.T. Roman's inventory of his 113 lists Antoine as a man of 38 years, and values him at $1,000. This high price for the time perhaps means that Antoine was better treated than others, yet his life remains one of tragedy, one of millions of those enslaved during that dark time in American history. While Antoine's efforts were highly successful, it wasn't until years later that his cultivar reached the public eye. The plantation was thrown into turmoil by debt, family troubles, and then the Civil War, leading it to change ownership several times. Many owners did not recognize the value of Antoine's grafted trees and chopped many down, just as they were reaching productive age, to make way for lucrative sugarcane crops. Yet some trees survived. The plantation was eventually bought by Hubert Bonzano, who took pecans along to Philadelphia's Centennial Exhibition in 1876, a landmark event that featured such icons of invention as Alexander Graham Bell's telephone and Heinz ketchup. There, the pecan received recognition for its, and I quote, remarkably large size, tenderness of shell, and very special excellence. The cultivar was later coined Centennial after the event that led to its fame, but more colloquially referred to as the paper shell pecan, given the ease of cracking it open. Many farmers followed in Antoine's footsteps, grafting many of the cultivars that we enjoy today. Pecan production and popularity exploded, and has kept on growing ever since, especially since pecans began to become popular around the world. Many of the 500 or so modern cultivars retain the names of the Native American tribes who the tree's ancestors sustained. Pawnee, Cheyenne, and Mohawk are just a few. And if you're thinking of looking into growing pecan yourself, you need to have plenty of both time and space. Pecan trees like a lot of room, but once established, are extremely beautiful. They are a fantastic shade tree that naturally forms a vase-shaped canopy that doesn't require pruning. Pecans like growing in humid climates on well-drained soils, with plenty of space and full sun. In the wild, they're often found along rivers, as long as they're not subject to prolonged flooding. To grow pecans from seed, you should sow them in a cold frame as soon as they become ripe in the autumn or winter. 1 or 2 months of cold prepares them for germination. After this cold spell, they should be incubated at room temperature. Once the seedlings have a bit of robustness to them, you can transplant them into deep pots with enough depth for the long taproot. Once it becomes a sapling in the summer, you can put it into its permanent position, but make sure to protect it from frost over its winter. Now just a note, because of that long taproot, it can be difficult to transplant larger trees, so it's a good idea that once you're planting it out, you do choose a spot that you want it to stay. It's a worthwhile endeavor. A productive pecan tree can produce up to 100 pounds of pecans in a single year, which, as we've already talked about, are both delicious and good for the body. And if you're into gardening and landscaping like me, you can crush up the shells to use for mulch and soil amendment, or even as a component of water purification. It turns out they are excellent at absorbing pollutants. These days, the U.S. continues to dominate the pecan market, producing 80 to 90% of the world's pecans, weighing in at an impressive 300 million pounds, or thereabouts. Demand from China has especially risen, accounting for about a third of sales of the U.S. crop, where pecans are enjoyed as a sweet or salty snack around Chinese New Year. The nut's booming popularity should come as no surprise. Pecans are a superfood, packed full of energy, nutrients, antioxidants, and vitamins. Research indicates they help to lower bad cholesterol and support heart health. As if I needed another reason to eat them, right? Did Antoine ever know about the roaring success of his efforts? Nobody knows. It's not even known if he was still alive in 1876, when nuts from his trees received praise and recognition from leading agricultural experts. Until recently, his name was omitted from most writings about the origins of pecan cultivation. So goes the story of many innovations made by enslaved or underprivileged people. But even though we know so little about him, at least we can now honor his memory and his exceptional achievements. And what about Oak Alley Plantation? These days, the site is a historic plantation, open for tourists to visit the mansion, formal gardens, and grounds. Though a couple of Antoine's pecans survived into the 1900s, these days they are no more. Yet, just a few years ago, some centennial trees were located and specimens were donated to Oak Alley, where in years to come, they should grow into productive trees that champion the legacy of their innovative but overshadowed creator. So what's next for pecans? We've already talked about many of the benefits they bring to natural ecosystems and to the humans that inhabit them, and a number of these benefits are only recently being discovered or rediscovered. So championing these trees is vital. Conserving and restoring the riverside ecosystems where they live, preventing the spread of pests and disease, and getting our communities involved in their appreciation and protection. So next time you're out walking along a riverside, see if you can find a pecan tree, and maybe I'll see you there. Thank you for joining me on this journey back to nature with Plant Connection. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to tap subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss the next episode. See you next time.